say, into the studio has walked Chris Manson, who, oh, what a polymath you are, Chris. So he studied at Oxford, then went off to be an accountant. This is Wikipedia, but no, actually, it's on your own website. Then what do? You went off to be an accountant. Then you worked for Andrew Lloyd Webber and his really useful company. Then you set up your own TV company, flogged that to Richard Branson, did well, congratulations. And then got involved in this idea of Richard the Lionheart. You heard about his diaries at university. You're nowhere near the mic. That's the only small problem. But for a media man, you should know that, Chris. And then you, yeah, and then you were able to acquire these diaries, which had been dug up by the Nazis from the grave of his wife in France. Is that all correct?
That's all correct. Yes.
Thank you for the research, Jason.
So the backstory to these diaries is that Richard, during the course of his life, was instructed by his father to write diaries to counteract the sort of negative propaganda that was coming from his opponents, the occupiers of the French monarchy, the French throne. And on his death, the diaries were passed to his wife, Berengaria, who lived for another 30 years in a monastery, in a nunnery in western France at Les Paux.
Why was she based in France?
Well, towards the end of the book, you find out that she suffered a great personal tragedy. She was from Navarre, which is in the south of France, but obviously she'd become queen of the territories that Richard reigned over. And she, after this personal tragedy, established herself in a nunnery and built a community to help the poor around her and so on.
Are you not telling us what the personal tragedy is, because that's a plot spoiler for the forthcoming TV series?
Well, perhaps, yes.
Yeah. Wait, just tell us about the TV series. Is it happening, and when is it happening?
Well, we're hoping that it's going to happen. There's great interest from two production companies in taking this, obviously with the current interest in Game of Thrones and other historical things.
Yeah, absolutely.
The story of Richard the Lionheart, which really is one of the great stories of history, is an attractive field for people to
when
mine.
did this book come out? The Lionheart
just
book?
recently published it.
Okay.
So, the diaries were discovered 18 months ago in Latin, and I've spent the past 18 months translating them.
Personally, or with a little bit of help from your friends?
Well, a little bit of help from my friends. That sets the backstory for the book, really, and enables people to believe in the story told in the first person, in the great tradition of books like I, Claudius and the Flashman Papers. And
okay, well, we'll get into what Richard I says in those diaries in a minute. Just to understand backstory a little bit for us all first. What did England look like territory-wise back in the mid and late 12th century?
Well, at that time it had become unified after the Norman conquest of 1066, when William the Conqueror had come over, and his successors reigned over England, but they treated it as a foreign country. They were basically Normans, and Richard's father, Henry II, had been Count of Anjou, and was a relatively minor noble, in fact, but through sort of his great force of his own personality and being a superb warrior, and more importantly, a great opportunist,
yes.
He managed to acquire and build the Angevin Empire, which stretched from Hadrian's Wall in the north of England, included parts of Ireland, and stretched all the way down to the Pyrenees through Navarre. So Henry II had acquired some of that through force of arms, and some of it through marrying Eleanor of Aquitaine, who again is one of the great women of history. She had previously been married to Louis VII of France, had gone on crusade with him, allegedly had an affair with his uncle, so she was put aside by Louis, allegedly because of this affair, but probably more likely because she had not given him any sons. She promptly went off and married his great rival, Henry II, and had 5 sons in quick succession.
Of which Richard was the third?
He was the third, yes. Yeah. So the oldest, William, died as a youngster, and Henry, the young king, who is the next one in line, dies in the course of the book.
Okay, so that's that story sorted out. The other story is just the story of the diaries themselves. You say that they were with Richard's wife. She was buried with them. They were then dug up by the Nazis, is that correct? Because you heard when you were a student that they existed, right?
That's right. I mean, the clue to this, that my tutor at the time had identified was that Berengaria was buried in the nunnery at Épau, and the effigy on her tomb shows her lying with the book across her chest, with the book closed, which is most unusual because at that time, when people were buried in effigy, they were buried with a book which was generally thought to be the Bible open in front of them to show how holy they were and enabling them to transition into heaven. And this was the clue to that. And then the German descendants of the people who had stolen the books contacted the family of
I think these were
Maidon.
stolen in the Second World War.
In the Second World War, when it occupied.
And the Germans were aware of the fact that these diaries might be with.
I think they. It's slightly unclear because I've sort of had to go through intermediaries with them, so that part is a bit unclear to me about how clear they were. I've also had to sign various agreements with them about keeping their name confidential and so on. So they contacted the family of this academic, who then I had been in touch with, and so we tracked them down that way.
And you bought them,
Yes.
And I think you have the rights to them until 2050, when they then will go to the British Library. Is that right?
Yes.
And have they been authenticated?
Well, they're authenticated in the sense that if you read them, we know that Richard and all of the characters there were in those places at the right time. So in that sense, they're authenticated. I'm not sure that they've been subject to the sort of Hitler Diaries type checking and so on. So, but it's up to the reader to determine.
It's a great yarn, you're quite right. So we'll talk about what he actually says in those diaries in a minute, after we've heard from John Martin.